So thank you. We appreciate that, Carly, Ace, Lena, for your time and being a part of this as well. So for everybody else in the room here, again, let's use our chat if we can. Drop any questions along the way. I'll help facilitate these questions back to our guests and our panelists, but they have very much offered up their time to help us learn from their experience and expertise too, so we can bring more into the Hoosier State as well. So let me kind of start with a little bit of those introduction and going through what a civic coalition is from your perspective, going down where I can see people. Carly, you're the furthest left on my screen here. Can you talk about the Civics Coalition in Kentucky and kind of how it's built, your formation, some goals, some of the things that you're doing there that maybe we can then learn to apply here?
Yeah, and I'll try not to hog all of the time because those are big questions, right? Hi everybody. Like we said, I'm Carly Mutertees. I'm here in Kentucky. I'm based in Lexington, Kentucky. And our civic coalition in Kentucky is very much grassroots. We're the Kentucky Civic Education Coalition. I spearheaded founding the coalition in partnership with our state social studies council, the Kentucky Council for Social Studies, which is a registered 501c3. And part of the reason I did that was to capitalize on some of the networking and work that the coalition was doing, the Social Studies Council, excuse me, but to have an explicit purpose around supporting civic education, and then have a way to better convene all of the different organizations across the state that are working towards civic education, but there wasn't necessarily like a central spoke that was bridging the connections across those diverse groups, right? Where we did have elected officials, we had nonprofits, museums, teachers, different people in education who were working towards civic education, and some folks doing a lot of really exciting work in the classroom. But again, we didn't really have like a central organization that was getting them in the Zoom room with one another and sharing some of the work. So that was the main impetus to starting this coalition. Our big project that came out of that was a civic seal, and I can circle back to that. But the reason we really anchored on a civic seal is, in addition to all of the scholarship that demonstrates programs like that allow for student agency to be to improve in academic and social outcomes across the board. We also recognize the value in having a central program that, again, could be a pathway for all of the dynamic civic ed programs across the state, but have a state level mechanism to acknowledge and validate that hard work. So our main stakeholder partner in that work is Kentucky's Secretary of State in Frankfort, in our capital. So, and I think we're unique in that, in working through the Secretary of State's office. But we found, again, in this very like grassroots way of organizing, for him to be a very strong and advantageous partner in the work. And I'll go off mute now and let my Maryland colleague speak to that too.
Awesome. Yeah, Lena, you were next in my line here on my screen. Tell us about Maryland. What do you got going on? How do you got working there?
Well, thanks first for the invitation to be a part of this, and it's great to see some folks that I know and respect are already in this coalition and as part of this conversation today, and also to meet those of you who are new to me. So, Carly, it's interesting that your evolution started very, very similar to that of Maryland. Before I joined the University of Maryland, I was in one of those civic education organizations that was trying to do some good with partnering with teachers. I worked at a place called Street Law, and I found that we were constantly sort of bumping into other good groups doing good work. And when I moved over to UMD, I was looking for a way to sort of elevate all the groups together and join us so that we could really have a more profound impact together. So I was part of the group that helped co-found the Maryland Coalition. We've been around since February of 2020. We got started just honestly a month before the pandemic really shut us down. It took a little bit of wind out of our sails, but because one of the things that we had wanted to do was a statewide survey of educators, meaning principals and teachers and community members and students, to find out what they say are the needs in Maryland and what we're doing well and what we could do better together. That survey was going to fall very clearly on deaf ears once the pandemic began. People weren't interested in talking about civics and doing surveys at that time about civics. They just needed to get through the day, honestly. So we're actually considering coming back to that sort of a survey because we think it will give us some legitimacy. And I don't know if you have the opportunity to consider something like that from the get-go. But that would be something that I would encourage you to speak with ACE about and with some of the other state coalitions who have done that work. We pivoted to doing a summit, and we wanted some sort of activity anyway, but we have used 3 annual summits now to really pull those groups together and gather anecdotal wish lists from folks. Again, the themes being what's working, so putting a spotlight on things that are going really, really well, but also what could we do better and together. We don't have the research necessarily, and we have a coalition of the willing who comes to those summits and then our invited guests. But part of our strategy in getting more people involved is bringing them in as a speaker or a participant on the summit and then having them understand sort of who we are. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are. We have several working groups that power our coalition. One of them is a membership working group, which in addition to co-chairing the coalition generally, I sort of haven't given up on the idea of also chairing the membership because I'm really dedicated to that piece of it. So our membership is students. We have a number of middle school and high school students who are on our Youth Advisory Council. That's our fastest growing demographic, actually, and frankly, our most diverse. We partner with the Maryland Association of Student Councils to bring in a lot of their student members. In addition, we work with some of our county partners who have active service learning programs, and we try to bring in youth there. And then there's also just sort of word of mouth. So we have a youth advisory coalition. We have membership from across our state. We're super intentional about making sure that we reach what are traditionally red and traditionally blue parts of our state to bring them in. We do that in part through our connections to higher ed. So while our coalition was initially focused on K-12, we are actually moving now toward a P20 sort of an approach for preschool through college. And so we have a number of community colleges, Research One universities who are in partnership with us. If I'm honest, they're, with the exception of UMD and 1 or 2 other schools, they're pretty quiet, but they really want to be a part of us. And I'm looking for ways to grow that impact. But we're community members, we're civic education organizations, we're policymakers, we're teachers who do identify themselves in their districts. And then we have teachers who don't identify their districts because you're trying to be careful about sort of how they live in their professional space. But we have working groups. I mentioned membership. We have a government relations, which really handles a lot of our advocacy work. So in this last year, we started advocating for a civic seals bill, and we had a fair amount of success in a short period of time, given what I've learned about Maryland's history with bills and how long it takes things to get passed. But we got unanimous Senate approval, but we didn't get anywhere in the House. So we're trying for it again this year. But we're also looked at the Civics Now national state policy menu and did a crosswalk with our own state policies to see like, well, if this is what Civics Now recommends for all states, how are we doing? In some cases, we're doing great. We have awesome state standards, just as one example. We have service learning as a graduation requirement. That's great. But so we didn't really need to put a lot of energy there. But we did need to do some other things. So we developed our advocacy policy based on the national model. So I think I'll pause there. There's a lot more that I could say. I'm sure you've got questions and I'm happy to field them.
Appreciate that. And let me do the kind of a similar question for Ace, and then we'll kind of pause to see if there's any questions for the group in our chat or anything that way before we kind of keep learning from our experts. But Ace, if you can talk to us about the Civics Now Coalition and how you see that the national push as well as your support for states doing things like that.
Absolutely. And I'll just say I am the biggest fan of these three coalition. So Lena and Tim and Chuck, what you guys have done, and Carly. And you'll see actually in the document that I'll share in the chat that Maryland and Indiana, both work of the coalitions, have been highlighted. So I know it's a new coalition, but you're all already seen as a national leader in a lot of this work. And Carly, in the next iteration, you would definitely be there as well. So I would say from a national standpoint, this coalition, this movement has risen rapidly. So in the last year and a half, we've grown from 165 organizations, state national organizations, to 315. And for those of us who have been in meetings with me, I basically go through it in the same exact way. It's like basically a recording that I have, but it's not just a recording. It's a way that I can pay attention and really learn about you. And I ask everybody when we're connecting to think in Venn diagrams. Like there's things that you're probably working on in your own organizational capacity that frankly, I will be philosophically interested with, because we're having this conversation. You're already like, I'm going to be philosophically interested in your work, but maybe there's some things that won't be practically part of the collective, and vice versa. There's things that I'm going to be working on that may be philosophically interesting to you, but not practically. So from that process of identifying, for each of you, why are you here? Why are you spending your time to come here? There were different functions that came about. So we have these 4 different sort of what I would consider peer learning or peer action affinity sort of groups. One is the State Policy Task Force, which is what Carly, Lena, and Tim and Chuck sit on as the leads of the different coalitions, so we can learn from each other. A second area is around research and best practices for us. Like, how do you do this effectively? Third part is about awareness raising. So how do you build awareness for this movement of why civic learning is really important? And then a fourth is around policy and advocacy. So how do we actually change the levers? So we can have people have policies, but if you're not aware that this is a zeitgeist, like why education exists, you won't act on those policies. If you have that awareness and the policies and are not doing the best practices, you're not going to have the impact. So that's where we landed as a group. And the work that we're now doing is getting into this area of collective impact, which is each of us are coming together with our own individual agendas. Those agendas are funded by organizations or some way that maybe, like, for a lot of us that, they pay our healthcare bills and things like that. What is that area of common agenda that I would ask for this coalition? And then if you have the common agenda, how do you measure whether you all collectively are getting towards that common agenda? Is it the number of people that are coming to your events? Is it that they're changing their views in some slight ways because they're coming to this event? Is the collaboration you're doing yourselves like part of that measure, like the quality of that collaboration? It could be a lot of different things. And then once you have those measures, like, what are the activities that get you towards that measure that you're collectively, like, now each of you might go about it a different sort of way. So Lena's organization of street law goes about education, former organization of street law goes about that work different than my organization of iCivics. but we're all going towards some sort of common agenda in terms of that building that understanding. So what are the ways that, like, what are those activities that could be different, but they're going towards at least in that right direction? And then how do you all communicate with each other about what that is so that you don't step on each other's toes, that you're leveraging the very best of each other's talents in that work? I will say again, like, I think there's some things that we've learned from that process from some of our best coalitions, which frankly included the work that you all did in Indiana as well, that coalitions have either part of their campaigns or as the whole work, these different 5 phases. So you're gathering information exactly to what Lena was saying, like, what do your teachers and your students think about what the needs are? So don't guess on that. Let's just find out what are those areas, gather that information. Recruiting, how do you make sure you have a viewpoint diverse and an equitable, like representing all the different demographics within Indiana? And then you kick off, whether it's you've already had that sort of kickoff with this group, but you might have it for a campaign, kick off the effort, implement the effort, and then take time to evaluate whether you were successful, so that if you were going into the next cycle, celebrate what you've already accomplished, which you all have accomplished a good bit with the bill and the work that you all have within these different, like the reports and the summit. You all have a lot to celebrate in Indiana. So take that time to celebrate and then think about how you might improve it again in the next go around, so that you're constantly improving. So happy to answer any sort of questions about, like, what that looks like for other sort of coalitions, but you do have 2 really amazing coalitions here in Maryland and Kentucky. So I will talk much less now that I'm done.
Thank you, Ace, and to all of that, to hear what's going on with each state, how you're kind of working that. I did a quick scan of the chat as far as any kind of specific questions, which I haven't seen yet. So this is where I want to turn to. So again, if you do have thoughts, questions, throw in the chat and I'll have to keep facilitating this in there. But I heard a lot of or I should say you, especially too, in your state organizations, of how to bring in the individuals and the organizations with that. So Lena, you had the student voice piece with that too. I caught that with there too. Carly, I keep hearing government and nonprofit connection within there too. So can you kind of talk about how to make sure student voice, government voice, nonprofit, like what are all of these coalition pieces that you see, and how to keep amplifying all this together, individuals, organizations that want to do stuff?
Sure, I'll talk about the youth piece for just a few minutes. And I saw the note in the chat from Charles as well. So maybe I can talk first about what it has brought to the coalition, and then I can back up and say how we've gotten youth involved. I'm sure what it has brought would not surprise all of you. It feels to me like a sense of legitimacy that is part of it, that, just as an example, when we wanted to have our Civics Seals bill introduced, we had young folks ready to testify. They wrote letters, and they were the people who were the most interesting speakers for the senators who were considering our bill. We prepped them with some advocacy advice, and I know that the National Coalition of iCivics is willing to support that sort of work as well. They are speakers on all of the way we set up our panel, our summit. We have a few plenary speakers, but we ask students to invite the senator, to introduce the senator or the governor or whoever the speaker is, and that just makes the students feel great, and it makes the speakers feel great instead of Lena doing it. It's boring, but that sort of highlights them. And then in addition to the plenaries, we have what we call roundtables. So it's typically 4 or 5 people on a topic. All of our roundtable panels have students on them. So like last year, we had this amazing first grader and his teacher talking about their little civics project that they did. This was civics across the ages. And they talked about, the fact that they wanted to the project they had in mind, and then they had to learn about wasn't really possible, but they ended up doing large print books for the grandmas and the grandpas and the neighbors who were in the senior center. So sweet, but like the first grader talked about it. So it wasn't a bunch of adults saying what kids can do. It was kids saying we can do this. And another piece of our, and we also had nonprofit folks on the same panel. We had university folks on the same panel. We had teachers on the same panel. So we're just trying to say we are a community and includes their voice. And then we also have something that we call a youth service and civics slam. So that is totally moderated by the kids themselves. So they write the scripts, they pick the speakers, they literally pass the mic in the Zoom room, and they have cute little graphics that they put together. So they talk 2 to 3 minutes about projects that they've done and what their challenges were and what they learned in it. And we've partnered with the Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism that has an annual youth service awards program, and we announce the winners at our summit. And so all of that sort of provides, again, sort of youth voice and youth legitimacy. So how do we find them? We started actually with somebody who found us first and found out that our state association of student councils has a civic education working group. And so well, who else you got over there? And so Eleni introduced us. We went to one of their annual meetings, and we've now recruited a whole bunch of folks. We've got over 40 youth now. And so we've got some of those award winners from the governor's office have joined our coalition. And now we nominate them for those awards. So it's sort of a reciprocal thing. But we've also there's a couple of counties that have really active and involved service programs. And we've gone to their district leaders and said, do you have youth that you would like to recommend? And now it's word of mouth.
Awesome. I love getting that youth voice in there. Carly, your talk of how to get the coalition building, all the different parts and pieces.
Yeah, well, and I can speak a little bit to youth involvement, which is really just kind of like doubling down on a couple things that Lena is doing. We don't have as robust of that element, but what we did, we have an executive committee, and then when we created our civic seal, we had an advisory council that was specifically for the seal, and just made sure that there was student representation on both. We had high school students on the civic seal, and we have had a mix of college and high school students on the executive committee. And they've been a really just powerful voice, treated like equals, both from the outset, but also in process, and have always had really thoughtful, impactful things to say. So we're still in the thick of piloting our civic seal. And here in the next month or so, we're also going to have a student focus group related to the seal to think about other resources or elements we need to be thinking about. So I really anchor on the idea of democracy schools, that the school is the laboratory for democracy. So giving students as many opportunities to participate in that way, I think is just super powerful. So I'm excited to get some inspiration from our Maryland folks as well.
Awesome.
And Tim, I think you're asking me something else, and I just wanted to talk about kiddos. But...
No, that's good, because it's how to get the root of the question. Really is the community of voices, organizations, individuals that want to participate with that. The youth is an important voice within that too. And Ace, you mentioned there's 300 plus voices within the Civics Now coalition. So your thoughts on getting these voices together?
So I think just to note that we're all learning together, right? There's just things that Lena's doing really well that I'm not even doing well as the national coalition. I'm not nearly as good in terms of youth voice as Lena is, and there's things that I can learn from her. And I think the one, just to note, we can all operate under a growth mindset. We can all improve. We can always improve in what we're doing. I would say the things that I noticed that Lena highlighted with a student voice piece that I try to incorporate into the other form of recruitment that I do is, one, I look at the category of the organizations. So, I have in my coalition, we have a lot of after school, out of school providers. We have a lot of voting rights organizations. We have cultural institutions and museums. And I often, once I get somebody that's really good in those areas, I ask them to say, like, who else do you recommend that we bring into the space? Like, considering that what our values are was, we want them to focus on K-12 civic learning, this democratic mission of schooling. So it doesn't have to be like civics, the discipline, but it can be doing English language arts, history, any sort of like that civic sort of mission, democracy school aspect that Carly highlighted. So I asked them, the organizations, to do that. So like looking like what Lena I heard in terms of like actually getting an organization of student councils. That's a great way to go about it. The other thing that I think that is in your committee structure, you structure it in like leadership and engagement and who you're asking to engage, structure that into it. If you feel like there's a specific weakness, put that into your structure. The third thing that I heard Lena say that I think is really, really important is that once they're there, give them a sense of agency and purpose of why they're there, because people can come to the table, but then they will soon leave the table when they feel like they're being tokenized, right? So like put something in there in terms of affirmation of validation and bring them meaningfully into that decision-making structure. And then the fourth is through these sorts of events. Give them something to do and recruit from. Have them when you have an event, it's a great opportunity to recruit and invite people and to broaden your movement. That's like one of the core outcomes that I would put measures of a successful event is your movement bigger after having done the event? So if you haven't incorporated that aspect of invitation from those events, I think that that's a big miss into what you do. And so that works. I mean, like, you've heard like how Lena in a very practical way incorporates that. Both Lena and Carly incorporate that with regards to youth, but you can do that with anything. You can do that with your cultural institutions. You can do that with your right or your left-leaning groups if you feel like your coalition's lacking one of those areas. Like recruit from the organization, have the organization invite others, give them meaningful agency, recruit through the events, and build that into your structure.
Awesome. I think this is giving us a lot of ideas of how we can just better organize and structure this group of what's my number say 27, 28 people at least that want to that we're able to give this hour, but there's obviously more that want to do more and keep pushing civics and everything forward in Indiana. And so that gives us some idea of how we can do some structure work, how we can do some actual advancement work. I really appreciate hearing all three of these perspectives to do that so that this group can come together stronger with that too. So let me do I don't think I saw any in the chat, but let me do a quick pause. Is there anybody that does have a question, would be wanting to come off mute or drop something in the chat for this group?
I just had a quick question. Is there like a signature item that you and your coalitions have either accomplished or are focusing on? I know Civic Seals is something we're looking at here in Indiana. And Ace, to your point about the Venn diagram, I've either stolen that or borrowed it from you as well. And that, there are certain overlaps in areas where the coalition can work together, but there are things outside of the coalition. So I guess how do you determine what a priority is for your particular state coalitions, and have you seen any particular projects that that you've really been able to move the ball on?
I think for us, the summit has been a big thing because that is really where we build trust with one another and learn from one another. And I told this story in a room where Ace was present just a couple of days ago. Honestly, there were people when we first got started with like, we ought to have a law, and they're like really wanted like change the law. And I was like, slow roll, man. Like, let's get to know one another and build some relationships here before we start telling the state leadership what the people want. And so that's really part of the reason why I wanted to do that survey and how we've used those summits. But now we are ready to advocate. And so you know, I don't know where this Civic Seals is going to go with us. I would love for it to really take off. And I'm going to be looking at you, Carly, for some ideas of leadership, and you two folks in Indiana. But, you know, last year's version of our Civic Seals bill was super narrow, frankly, and it had zero money because that's what we were advised, because Maryland has just made a massive investment in public education. We were told if you try to put a single dollar into anything, you'll just get turned down, period. So we made the Civic Seals notion, you know, totally opt in by all the districts, et cetera, et cetera. But this year, we're trying a different tact, I think, which is we're trying to make it so big that we actually make it the excuse for the PD. So if you're going to have a Civic Seal, you better have some money to do the PD that's going to go along with making the Civic Seal work. Or if you're going to be counting service learning hours, which we have to count for graduation requirement anyway, you know, we need to expand the capacity of our service learning coordinators at the school, district level, and state level to do better work, to do higher quality service learning. So it's to program fidelity. So we're now sort of testing the idea of making all of our priorities under this big, well, if we're going to do Civic Seals, let's do it right. So it becomes a vehicle and not just an end in and of itself. But I don't know if we're going to get shut down because of that.
I'm going to, sorry to interrupt before Carly or Ace steps in, just so everybody's on the same page of what is a civic seal, because that term has been thrown out around a lot. There's a lot of different ways to show this, but a lot of the root of it is typically students at the high school level have achieved something that they can show that they are above proficient and above, you know, actionable piece knowledge of civics to be put as part of their diploma, either like a physical seal on the diploma, a notation on their transcript, something along the way that a high school student can come out and say, I'm a superstar of civics. And it's been, you know, sanctioned by the state in some way there too. So it's an extra diploma piece with there for high school students is typically what you see there. So at least that's a little bit of making sure everybody's on the same page with that. So thanks.
But there's two pieces, right, Tim? There's like the civic seals for kids, and then there's what Carly was referencing about the democracy schools. Like there's also the civic seals for schools that are like doing exceptionally well at preparing citizens. So some states go for one, some states go for the other. A few states go for both. We're trying for both.
And I've even seen a third one at the teacher level as well, like an extra kind of piece of within their certification, they have some enhanced civics piece. So yes, Lena, absolutely. Kind of we see kind of a 3-tiered piece, whether a student, teacher, or school level sanction of civic promotion with that. So yeah. So Carly, Ace, something you want to showcase about how you goal set and what your signature achievement is?
Yeah, I can speak. We actually the Civic Seal, that idea of enhancing and incentivizing civic education was really our main like organizing carrot, if you will. We do not have legislation on the books. And before even the coalition existed, that was the first thing the state council shopped around with legislators, was what would it take? I wrote the bill. I said, what would it take to get this passed? And essentially there wasn't a lot of appetite for it with our legislature as it was then and as it is now. Largely because one, as Lena was saying, there isn't an appetite for funding such projects. We also, Kentucky is a local control state. I don't know what Indiana is, but essentially curricular decisions are made at the local level. And there's also just, a fierce protection of that idea of not mandating programs. And likewise, there were other reasons for not wanting to reinforce civic engagement. And we won't get into the thick of that, but we actually went through the Secretary of State because it could be that opt-in program that nonetheless has that state level legitimacy, but doesn't feel like a state mandate, right? So the pathway for that then is necessarily flexible, where it can be opted into by individual teachers. We're working on the logistics of individual students, and then also being able to manage a program like that. And also elementary, middle, and high school. The state leaders of social studies and I are really committed to elementary being spotlighted more in these incentive programs. So we have a pilot in a 3rd grade classroom that I'm super excited to see what they come up with. But that's our crowning achievement, TBD. We're still piloting and learning. But I am excited about that idea of a very, again, grassroots, but locally minded approach to civics, because we're working at districts all over the state in piloting, and each of them is actually going about it in different ways. We have a very rural county in Eastern Kentucky that is thinking about it through their career and tech ed program versus just, that one civics course in social studies. But anyway, I'll pass it off to Ace, see what he's got to say.
No, I mean, what's really powerful, the way what I gather from what both Lena and Carly are saying, is that whatever opportunity you pursue should provide a lot of different on-ramps for different organizations and off-ramps for different actions that come out of it. So on-ramp for, like, just as a given example of the Civic Seal, there's a lot of different people that can come together in defining what that is. Off-ramp is that it relates to, like, professional development and other things that different stakeholders can engage. I would say they're never going to say this to you. I wish one of them would say this to my coalition people as well. So I will say it to you all. If you're not feeling engaged, that is, like, in terms of, like, your talents and whatever you're doing is not feeling engaged in the work of this coalition, it's both on Tim and Chuck because they haven't asked the question, but it's really also on you because you haven't brought in what your interest is and what you think that your talent is. So, like, that would be, I think, the main thing for me, is that throughout the process of the life of a coalition, the coalition is only strong. Like, if you don't use your voice to say, like, this is the direction or this is the initiative that brings me, that taps into my passion, that's, like, on you as well, like, to be able to step up and say that in there. So what I think of that in terms of, like, the Civic Seal, and I would say the same thing for some of the rest of these things on the menu, state policy menu, is that they do provide those sorts of on-ramps and off-ramps. So, standards process that takes some years to build to, and it has some implications. You can say, like, how do we measure, assess, and accountability, professional development? Some of us can provide professional development in different sort of ways. So that's the types of initiatives that I would say, like, think about and be able to be really vocal and talking to each other about, this is why I'm coming in here. This is the change that I think that we should see, and let's be in it for the long haul together. The major initiative, I guess, like, example for me from our national work would be National Civic Learning Week. And I'll put the link to that here. It's happening between March 11th and 15th. We did our first national version of it last year. And so last year, I think 20 some states, I think Indiana was one of those states, Tim, Chuck, that participated in some way in Civic Learning Week. Was it? Maybe not, maybe so, but hopefully this year it might be. But the what I like about the Civic Learning Week and the way that we've been implementing it is it allows different sorts of talents and different resources to be able to engage in it. So if you're an advocacy organization, you can use that as a lever to bring advocacy. If you're just an awareness organization, like amplifying, you can do that from an amplification standpoint. If you want great research through your higher ed program, you can do that. So, like, thinking about, like, again, like, what are the specific ways that things that have on ramps and off ramps, and then things that would that you can invite many different sorts of talents to do in terms of the execution would be my advice.
Awesome resources there too. And Ace taking some of your comments to heart there too, and I know I kind of did a quick reference earlier. I think this whole conversation is helping us think through organization, like true coalition building, all of our goals, and again, I keep in the mind of we have a lot of individuals and organizations that want to keep doing something. How do we amplify a collective voice to keep bringing us pushing together? So a lot of what all three of you have said, I think, have helped bring that together. And knowing, looking at the clock, that there's only maybe about 10 or 15 minutes left of the hour we asked of everybody. But let me pause, I guess, again to see anybody else in the room. Questions for our experts, thoughts on your reactions to our experts here. Again, how do we best work our collective voice here in Indiana to keep things moving is where all this keeps going to. So questions for our experts, reactions to our experts, anybody at this point? Well, I want to make sure we do save the time for that. And I'm happy to facilitate the chat, or anybody's welcome to come off mute as well.
Tim?
Yeah, Jim.
Jim Ditto here. I put a note in there and I misspelled things in there, but I'm not a very good typist because I never took typing in high school. And learning. I've been working with the Sagamore Institute here in Indianapolis as a quote unquote senior intern. And I say senior because, as Tim knows, I'm 80 years old, but I worked with a 19-year-old this past summer from Notre Dame. And he has put together some very, very interesting documents dealing with the development of youth civic engagement councils that I've helped develop with mayors around the state of Indiana. My question to the experts there for the coalitions, do you have examples of local youth civic engagement councils that work directly with local officials of all types, and including business communities, not-for-profits, and so forth?
I would cue Carly there for Civic Lexington, maybe Civic Lex. Is that a good one, Carly?
Can you repeat the beginning of your question? I couldn't hear it.
Yes, I'm helping develop local youth civic engagement councils to give them a lot of responsibility. But it's difficult, and there was a comment there that we get the best and the brightest at the table first, and trying to involve other young people in that. My question is, do you have in your two states, Kentucky and Maryland, local youth civic engagement council types of things? And if so, I'd like to be involved in and learn more about that. We can talk offline on that, in fact.
Yeah, one of the groups that we have that does quite a bit in that regard is we have what's called the Kentucky Student Voice Team. They came out of a different education nonprofit. They branched out, but their whole emphasis is on elevating student voice, student engagement, and engaging also in policy spaces. So they have been a great advocate in this work. And then to what Ace was discussing is I work really closely with a local nonprofit in my city called Civic Lex. And some of their work is starting to branch out beyond Lexington. But essentially what they do is they emphasize building connections between local government and people. So essentially making local government digestible and also accessible. And we have been working with the local school district in building out some of these civic engagement programs at the school level, which has included some of these already established like student leadership groups at the school level. But I don't know if any of that helps.
Sure, it does indeed. And I'd like to follow up with you after we're all off here, see how we can help coordinate.
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat for anyone who wants to talk later.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome. I saw one in the chat there, Seamus, and I know you and I have had that conversation before, but I'll let you kind of ask the question. Looks like you're looking at the intersection of civics and literacy skills and pieces that way. And so kind of where you want to take that, Seamus, here.
I'm always looking for things that are going to happen anyway, and how could it be integrated? On the top of the policy, education policy issues that are out there, is early elementary literacy initiatives. So have been having actually a few conversations with state house leaders in Indiana about how we could integrate civics content into other literacy initiatives, early learning, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So you're actually covering the substantive content of basic U.S. history and systems of government. And I think the technical term for that in the field is called knowledge-based literacy. So for those states that are getting highly involved in the science of reading discussion, that could be an opportunity for you there as well.
Lena,
And
I
I'm
just
sure
keep up and down. Yeah, sorry, Lena. So I can interrupt there. Yeah.
You've got my bobblehead going. So I think Seamus must be familiar, probably much more so than I, with the research that shows that when you use the content of social studies as a way of teaching reading skills and I think also writing skills, although I'm less sure about the evidence there. It's probably there, I just don't know it. But when you use the background knowledge of when you use civics and history, you actually see a bigger impact on the growth of the student in their learning, in their reading skills. And so to me, that speaks back to that elementary piece. That's now one of our advocacy issues, because in Maryland, at least, we have a real problem with elementary civics. There's educators call this question seat time, like literally how much time you're dedicating to social studies. And, in some of our schools, which theoretically are awesome school districts, we're experiencing like 30 minutes a week for elementary social studies. So that could be like dedicated social studies time. Well, are our elementary educators prepared to teach social studies? That's another layer of the problem. And do they feel comfortable doing it? That's another layer of the problem. But some of it could be, are you teaching social studies or are you teaching reading? And if you're teaching reading and you're using social studies to do it, aren't you kind of teaching both? So there's ways to frame some of these on an advocacy agenda that really could be elevating more than one goal.
Yeah, I think I totally that resonates with me. Like two of our newer coalition members are the National Council for Teachers of English, and another one is this organization TIES. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's a STEM-based organization. And so I think it's really thinking about the end in mind. What we want people to be able to do is be informed, engaged members of our society, right? And that's not just obviously social studies is a part of that, but it's not the whole of that. And so, especially I think in elementary grades where they're focusing much more on English language arts or math is like a little bit harder, but I haven't seen anybody crack that really well. But English language arts for sure I've seen. Or like, in the elementary grades or middle, high, whatever, social emotional learning or character education type. So thinking about all these things not as an ends, but as a vehicle to the end. So the end is kids have graduated from high school and they're informed and engaged members of their communities and our democracy. Now the means, like the means are up for grabs. Let's all just discuss that, and we all have different sort of avenues for that. So if Indiana's really strong on English language arts, of course you can incorporate that into there. If you're incorporated really making a STEM initiative, talk to the STEM people, bringing them in and think about what the larger purpose of that is. There's much bigger conversations right now on artificial intelligence and what that means for informational literacy. So whatever the conversation is, I've always found it's a lot easier to tag on to the existing ongoing vehicle rather than creating your own vehicle from scratch.
And again, I think a lot of this is helping us collectively keep thinking about where we can go, where we can improve. How do we make this coalition work even stronger together? So looking at the clock, I got about 5 minutes left. And so I'll do a quick pause to see if there's any other last minute questions or reactions for our guests. My teacher training wait time. So hearing none, and I guess seeing no actual questions within the chat that I think I didn't miss here. Again, thinking of what Ace said there, please let us know how you would like to keep moving forward. We're going to take your comments, your feedback, our learning piece from our three experts here, and just kind of keep trying to create a stronger structure that we can keep pushing civics together with this. And so I think it's been mentioned, this whole group, our Indiana Civics Coalition, is really only maybe about 6 months of real push of a true bringing together. So we want to try to keep making sure we can do this together. It really is the lens that we're working with of how to amplify and bring everybody together and showcase that. So please do not be a stranger. Feel free to call or email me and Chuck and Isaac here in the office that are going to help keep putting things together with that. We'll keep pushing things out to you. You keep pushing them back to us. We will keep doing a lot of things together. Lena, Carly, Ace, thank you so much for your time today and hearing about what you guys are doing in your states and across the country. And it's definitely helped, I think, a lot of our thinking with that too. So
Thank you. Yeah, I would just end up saying that often we're looking for Chuck and Tim and Isaac's advice on different things. So as far as the collective impact effort goes, you need a great backbone organization, and they are really good. And we're very lucky to have them, and we're very lucky to have you all in the Hoosier State leading that movement. So thank you so much for all the work that you all are doing.
appreciate that. So thank you so much. Like I said, we'll be in touch, but please reach out to us. We're going to keep doing this together. So thank you again for your support and time and everything today. So appreciate that, everybody.